Thank you for having me here. I'm going to be talking about our research conducted in collaboration with two Kenyan organizations, the Center for the Study of Adolescence and Elim Trust. And I want to acknowledge all my co-authors. And yeah. So today we'll be exploring three things: how and why climate change matters for HIV prevention, our study design and findings, and ways forward. So what I'm presenting today builds on 5 years of qualitative mixed methods and arts-based research we've been doing in 6 regions in Kenya. We've been focusing on lived experiences of extreme weather events, resource insecurities, and pathways to sexual and reproductive health. And all the photos you see today are part of our qualitative study where we have ethics approval and consent for sharing the photos taken by youth about their experiences of extreme weather. So it is clear to most of us, probably all of us in this room, that human activities have caused global warming and extreme weather events, and that there are profound water, food, and sanitation insecurity issues directly caused by climate change and extreme weather events. 2023 UN data shows that 2 billion people do not have access to safe and clean drinking water. 3.6 billion, so 46% of the world's population, do not have access to adequate sanitation facilities, and 733 million faced hunger in 2023. This actually rises to 1 in 5 people living in Africa. So there's also a growing body of research that shows pathways between extreme weather events and HIV vulnerabilities. For instance, we know that drought is associated with women's HIV prevalence increases across various African countries, plausibly due to increased transactional sex and reduced agency for condom use. And a study in 21 countries across Africa found that heavy rainfall was also associated with elevated HIV and STI acquisition risks. And the potential pathways that have been hypothesized include poverty, transactional sex, sexual and gender-based violence, and disrupted healthcare access. So our own team did a scoping review. We included over 80 studies, and we looked at multi-level pathways from extreme weather events through structural impacts such as health infrastructure damage, community impacts such as migration, interpersonal impacts such as increased transactional sex, and individual impacts, say, through mental health challenges. And there was another review published soon after ours that also included reproductive health that you might be interested in. More recently, I was invited to lead a review of recent papers from extreme weather events and climate change to HIV outcomes. So we actually differentiated HIV prevention and care through similar pathways, but also slightly different, including structural impacts, multiple resource insecurities, and economic shocks, migration and displacement, as well as the individual and interpersonal outcomes and impacts. Yet across all of these different reviews and data that's been collected, there remains persistent knowledge gaps. For instance, we know that adolescents aged 10 to 24 in sub-Saharan Africa experience increase, specifically young women have threefold higher HIV acquisition risks than among their young men counterparts. However, none of the reviews of climate change and extreme weather events and HIV vulnerabilities focus on adolescents. There are also key populations missing from these reviews. So sex workers specifically were not included in any of these reviews. And the case I'm presenting today is a great place to start looking at this. While Kenya's adult HIV prevalence is 3.2%, 38% of 2023's new infections were among youth, and Kenyan youth face other sexual health challenges, including sexual and gender-based violence and early pregnancy. So we know that climate change is associated through many complex pathways with increased gender inequities, including sexual and gender-based violence, and Kenya is facing increasing extreme weather events, including floods as well as droughts. Many of you will know that it was deeply impacted by the Horn of Africa drought. So there are these knowledge gaps about what exactly are the pathways from extreme weather events to HIV vulnerabilities among adolescent girls and young women in contexts that are affected by both HIV and climate change, such as Kenya. And so this was a community-based research study conducted with the Center for Study of Adolescence, so CSA, in Kisumu and Nairobi, and Elim Trust. So we looked specifically at associations between extreme weather events, resource insecurities, food, water, and sanitation, and HIV vulnerabilities and biomedical HIV prevention outcomes, with a purposive sample of adolescent girls and young women aged 16 to 24 in Nairobi and Kisumu. So these were selected after a 5-year qualitative study as being two climate and HIV-affected regions that our local partners had deep connections with. So we worked specifically in Majengo and Mathari, which are informal settlements in Nairobi, and we worked in fishing communities outside of Kisumu along Ogal and Rota beaches. And so both of these contexts are affected by extreme weather events, including heavy rainfall, flooding, drought, and heat waves. So the study was named by the team after a lot of deliberation as Radia Weather, which is in Swahili approximately what's up with the weather. We did purposive sampling using peer navigators, connections, as well as with study coupons, word of mouth, social media, and venue-based. So we had specific eligibility criteria that would also mean that our cohort would be PrEP eligible. Where that stands right now is, as you all know, a little in the air. So they had to have experienced at least one resource insecurity, food, water, or sanitation, or extreme weather event, such as flooding or drought in the last 14 days, any HIV vulnerability in the past 14 days, such as being an adolescent or a young mother, transactional sex, intimate partner violence. They just speak English, Swahili, or Luo, provide informed consent. And then in Kisumu, we were really interested in people engaged with the fishing industry because of the high prevalence in the fishing communities and the lack of specific focus in the climate and HIV research on young women in the fishing industry, as well as adolescent and young mothers due to their higher acquisition risks, but also omission from HIV and climate research. And so we assessed extreme weather events in multiple ways using past research. We looked at any extreme weather event experience in the last 12 months, and we summed and categorized that, the frequency, so have you faced any of these weather events more than once, and the number, as well as eco-anxiety. We also looked at past 4-week water insecurity with the HY scale, past 4-week food insecurity with the household food insecurity access scale, and sanitation insecurity, as well as socio-demographic variables. And so we had both HIV vulnerability outcomes as well as biomedical prevention outcomes, including transactional sex in the past 12 months, past 12-month intimate partner violence, and sexual relationship power, as well as PrEP awareness, lifetime use, which we dichotomized into never versus lifetime. And this is also a notable finding. There was insufficient sample size, which I'll present, currently using PrEP to include it as a separate outcome, as well as PrEP acceptability. So we conducted descriptive statistics, as well as binary logistic and linear regression with backward stepwise regression methods and a sensitivity analysis. So we conducted all of the analysis combined by location and then separately by location, and there was no significant differences based on the outcome variable, so what I'm presenting is combined across locations. And so what did we find? I hope I'm not talking too fast. We had 597 participants. The mean age was 20 years old, and we had more participants in Kisumu. Originally, we were planning to have 250 in each location, but recruitment went so well in Kisumu that we actually expanded our sample, so we have more in Kisumu. Over half had children, so 62%, and this is notable if you only leave knowing one thing from this presentation. 49.8% were severely food insecure, and an additional 32% moderately food insecure. 63% were water insecure. 51% engaged in transactional sex. And then current PrEP use was 7.8%. Lifetime PrEP use was only 16.8%, and everybody in the study would have been PrEP eligible. Yet 78.4% knew about PrEP, and among those who had never used, over half said they were willing to take it. And so I'm not going to go into depth about all of these findings, but I'm happy to share it with you afterwards, but just wanted to note about the weather events that people were experiencing. And so while 16% reported one weather event, 52% reported 2 to 4 weather events, and 31.8%, so almost 32%, reported more than 5. So what kind of weather events were these? The most common were extreme rain and flooding. Actually, this was a big issue during data collection. We had to buy galoshes for people to do, and big rain umbrellas. It was quite dramatic, the rainfall last year. Extreme rain, so changes in expected rain patterns, expected temperature, drought, extreme heat, wind, cold, and fire. Those were the top ones. And so I'm going to present the findings in detail on the next slide, but this is a highlight of the findings. So sanitation and water insecurity were associated with increased transactional sex. I think most of you know that usually the only resource insecurity looked at with regards to transactional sex is food insecurity, so I think this is an important finding. Increased past year extreme weather events and eco-anxiety were associated with higher IPV odds, intimate partner violence odds. Food and sanitation insecurity and increased extreme weather event frequency were associated with reduced sexual relationship power. Sanitation insecurity and extreme weather event frequency associated with reduced PrEP awareness, and sanitation insecurity and increased extreme weather events were associated with PrEP acceptability. So this is the more granular findings. Another variable that's important to note in these findings is that being a young mother was associated with increased odds of transactional sex, PrEP awareness, and PrEP acceptability, as well as intimate partner violence. So you see the benefits of looking at extreme weather events in multiple ways. So the number of extreme weather events was associated with increased IPV, and whereas the frequency was associated with increased PrEP acceptability and reduced PrEP awareness, as well as looking at multiple resource insecurities beyond food. So what we did find food insecurity was associated with reduced sexual relationship power. We also found water and food insecurity associated with transactional sex, and reduced sexual relationship power. And so for my last 2.5 minutes, I just want to briefly go over some of the implications. So we found both sociodemographic factors, weather and resource insecurity factors alongside sociodemographic factors associated with these relational level HIV vulnerabilities, transactional sex, sexual relationship power, and intimate partner violence can be considered relational level HIV vulnerabilities. Yet extreme weather events and resource insecurities were also associated with increased willingness to take PrEP, signaling opportunities to engage climate and HIV-affected adolescent girls and young women in prevention. And we really need to look at these relational level factors as potential pathways connecting extreme weather events to the increased HIV acquisition risks we find in contexts of, for instance, drought and flooding and other extreme weather events. And PrEP is really understudied in relation to extreme weather events. So this is really an opportunity for our future research in this field, as well as looking at multiple extreme weather event types. Most research looks at drought or flooding, but we found looking at the cumulative exposure and the exposure to different types was meaningful in looking at HIV prevention outcomes. And we can think about the HIV prevention cascade and the multiple dimensions of the cascade in relationship to climate change. So we really do see that this is a climate and HIV-affected young women are a priority population who can benefit from prevention, because we see that these resource insecurities and extreme weather events linked with HIV vulnerabilities. We also can see that it's important to consider access and capability in contexts where people experience food, water, and sanitation constraints, as well as intimate partner violence and lower sexual relationship power. And we can also see this motivation dimension of the prevention cascade is relevant as extreme weather events and resource insecurities were linked with increased PrEP willingness. I'm not going to go over this in depth, but in our article, we do document potential for multi-level interventions that would consider climate change and HIV prevention and care. And some of these could involve early warning systems with HIV and intimate partner violence prevention with youth-friendly platforms based on what kind of extreme weather event was happening, integrating gender transformative and HIV approaches into disaster preparedness. So there's this opportunity for our fields to come together, and self-care approaches for HIV, such as self-testing and youth-friendly access points. So we have a commentary currently in revision on the potential of self-care, such as HIV self-testing, long-acting PrEP, in the context of extreme weather events. So hopefully you'll see that soon, building on the WHO guidelines. And I didn't have a chance in the talk today to bring in the strength-based approaches, such as flourishing, disaster resilience, and looking at the implications for sexual health and well-being beyond risk and disease. So let's look at the range of extreme weather events, consider how existing gender and power inequities amplify the effects of climate change, and integrate climate-proof, strength-based, and self-care strategies into HIV prevention. Thank you.